Welcome to another edition of Well, That Needs to Be Replaced. What are we replacing today? Wheel bearings. So, how do I know if I need wheel bearings, you might ask? Well, let me show you. With the machine off the ground and the weight off the back tires, just push and pull in and out on the top of the tire, and you can see it wiggling. You can even hear the play in there. When you do that, if your axle shaft is moving inside the hub and the hub is not moving, that means that the play is in the wheel bearing. Now this isn't too bad just yet, but it's bad enough where I want to replace it. I don't like a lot of wear on my machine. You can also see the brake caliper is moving with it. If this gets too much play in it, you could end up messing up your brake, so I'm going to go ahead and replace it. Alright, the first part of this process is very similar to replacing your axles, which I did in the last video with these SuperATV Rhino brand axles. But this time we're going to be separating the hub assembly here. So we have to remove the brake caliper. You got two bolts, 15mm socket should fit them. There's one here and there's one right down here below it. We're going to go ahead and take them two out and get the brake caliper out of the way. Alright, with both of these little bolts out, all you have to do is pull straight out on the caliper, wiggle it a little bit, and it'll come right off. This is a good time to check your brake pads and make sure they're not too badly worn down. These still have plenty of material on them, so I don't have to change these yet. The next step is to go ahead and remove this cotter pin and take this castle nut off. That will allow you to pull the rotor and lug assembly out of the hub. Alright, with any luck we should be able to just pull this rotor right out of there. There's some washers that are in here that we're going to need to catch as they come out. Make sure you don't lose those. Oh, it did come off. If this is stuck or in a bind where it doesn't want to come off, just take a rubber mallet, not a hammer. You don't want to mess up this rotor. And just gently tap on the back side of it to work it out, but it should just come right out. Now, just like when we were replacing the axle, we'll go ahead and take these upper and lower bolts out of the control arms. Mine is 15mm for the top and 18 for the bottom. Yours could be 15 on top and bottom. I'll just take these two bolts out and then we can remove the bearing carrier. Alright, we just removed the bearing carrier right off the axle, right out of the control arms, and now we'll replace the bearing. Alright, I took this out there and washed it up a little bit, got the grit off of it and the mud out of this little groove here. There's a snap ring here that you got to get out. The bearing actually comes out this direction, and this snap ring prevents that from happening. So if you got a lot of grit or mud caked up in here, you need to clean that out so we can remove this snap ring. Now that's a pretty substantial snap ring. It can hurt you if it hits you in the face, especially. So what I normally do is put my hand over it as I start squeezing it, and then keep it over it as you work it out. That way, when it pops, it doesn't go flying somewhere. Now we're ready to press this bearing out. Alright, let's go ahead and push this bearing out of the carrier. What I've got here is a little small 12-ton shop press that I got from Harbor Freight. I think it's about $120. Well worth the investment if you work on your own machines. I use this for the ball joints in the front A-arms, and also for wheel bearings. It's almost invaluable for those. What I have here is a socket. I got a set of 3/4 inch drive sockets. This is a 1 inch and 13/16. It fits right down in that carrier, right on top of the bearing. What I'm going to do is push the bearing until it hits this pressure plate here, and then I'll put two of them and separate them and push the bearing on between and out the bottom. Alright, the bearing is beginning to come free. As you can see, this is the proper tool for this job. Alright, it's beginning to tighten up on that plate. I'll let it off a little bit, and then I'll put the other plate up here. And what you want is to catch the edges of the bearing carrier, the edges of these plates. That way the bearing can come out between them. Once it becomes once it pushes down a little bit, go ahead and remove the pressure, and then make sure these plates are up against the bearing so that it can still slide through, but you got as much of the carrier supported on them as possible as you push the bearing the rest of the way out. Alrighty, the old bearing is out. Alright, quickly I want to do a side-by-side comparison here. This is the original bearing, obviously, because it's pretty nasty. It came in my Razor. It's got about 900 miles on it of mud, water, trail use, rock use. It's held up pretty good. Well, this is a SuperATV bearing here. Obviously they're exactly the same size or it wouldn't fit. But the one advantage this has that the factory bearings do not is there is a nice rubber lip right here on the surface where the axle and the hub torque down on the bearing. This gives it a nice surface to mount to it. They say it helps reduce like vibration, noise, slippage. It's just a nice little feature that the factory bearings do not have. I took this out there and rinsed it off some more. Got all the grit out of it. What I've got here is a little fine piece of emery cloth that I'm using to clean out the inside of this hub, or bearing carrier as they call it, where the bearing goes in. You can see the difference there where I've cleaned it, where I haven't. I just scrub that down and get it nice and clean. Keep it wet and it'll make it easier to do this, and then once you get it all clean, just rinse it back out good. Alright, I've got the inside of this bearing carrier cleaned up good. Got it nice and dry. You do use Loctite on these bearings to help seal them to the bearing carrier when you put them in. And these things come packaged with a little bit of oil on them. So what you want to do is clean that off just on the outside surface. What I got here is a little bit of mineral spirits on a paper towel, and I'm just going to carefully wipe just the outside of this bearing without getting this stuff on the seals or anywhere else it's not supposed to be. The keen-eyed observer might pick up on a clue what my next how-to video could be about. Alright, and we're going to put the bearing back in. I got the outside all cleaned. I took mineral spirits like you saw and wiped it out, and then I took a wet paper towel and wiped the outside to get the mineral spirits off, and then dried it. So what we're going to do is just set it right back down in the carrier and then tap it to get it started. Now what you don't want to do, you don't want to hit it in the middle. You don't want to hit it anywhere on the seal surfaces. What you want to do is just tap it around the outside edge all the way around to get it started. You also want to make sure that your bearings stay straight with your carrier here. I can tell that this side is a little lower than this side, so I'm going to tap it over here to even it back out. Next step is to put a little thread locker around the outside of this bearing. The blue is what's recommended. So I'll just put just a little bit around the outside of this bearing. And don't overdo it, because chances are you're going to be wiping a bunch of this back off. Alright, now it's time to press this bearing down into the carrier. If you're using sockets like I am, what I have here is a 2 3/8 inch. It fits right down inside this carrier, right inside that cup where the bearing sits perfectly. So I set that on my plate, and then the carrier right on top of that, and then on top of the bearing what I got here is a 2 3/16. Now this edge is exactly the same size as the outside of that bearing, so as I'm pushing the bearing in, I'm only pushing on the outer race of this bearing. So I get everything lined up, and then we'll begin seating it. As you begin pushing it in, just make sure that it stays straight. As you can, hopefully you can tell it's beginning to go crooked. That happens on every single one I've done. So what we have to do is take the hammer and tap it on this side to level it back out. Again, just make sure you hit it right on this outside race, and careful not to hit the seal or the center. You don't want to damage those. If the bearing isn't straight and you keep on pushing it, you could damage your carrier here. So everything's back in line. We'll start pushing it back in. Looks like this time we're good to go. I'm going to push it all the way down until it begins to build pressure. Then you know you're seated fully on the back. Now don't over tighten it so you don't damage anything, because this is aluminum, or the carrier is aluminum. But it does have to be far enough down for the snap ring to go back in place. Alright, now go ahead and reach in there and wipe out that excess Loctite before it gets on anything that it's not supposed to be on. Alright, carefully, let's put the snap ring back in. I've got my pliers on it, put my hand on it, keep it from hitting me in the face. We'll set it down in there and release. And there it is. Alright, before you reassemble everything, you want to clean this surface here off. This is where the bearing sits, and this flat surface back here, it's got a little curve right at the inside lip. This is where it actually torques down against the bearing. So I'm going to take some mineral spirits and just clean this up good. Alright, now that surface is all cleaned up, I've got a little bit of my waterproof green grease here. I just like to put this on the outside of the surface where the bearing rides. This will help keep mud and water out of it, and make it so that it comes apart freely the next time you need to take it apart. If you put it together dry, this could seize up inside that bearing, and it could cause you all kind of problems trying to get it off. So just put a little thin layer around that outside, and then go ahead and fill this spline up on the inside where the axle shaft goes, for the exact same reason. Now to reassemble it, we just kind of reverse the process. It's pretty simple. All we do is stick the carrier into the axle, and then go ahead and put the bolt through the bottom control arm. Now everything's still cleaned up from the last time when I replaced my Polaris axles with these SuperATV Rhino axles, so I don't have to go through that step. We'll just put the bottom bolt in. We'll put the top bolt in. And then without getting grease on the brake rotor, we just put it in. Get it lined up on the spline. Push it into the bearing. Okay. And here's our cone washers. So what I have here is just 2 of the cone washers. Make sure that they're turned so the high center is sticking out toward the castle nut here. We'll put those on. Put the castle nut on. Put the washer and nut on both control arms. I'm going to go ahead and snug these up. I'm going to go ahead and snug up the castle nut. Alright, in the video where I put these Rhino axles in, I got a pretty good detailed breakdown about the torque on a lot of these bolts here. I'm not going to completely go over that right now. All I'm going to do is tell you that this upper bolt is 42. So I'm going to go ahead and torque it up. This lower bolt on my machine, an 18mm socket fits it. We tightened that up to 40 plus a 180-degree turn. If on your machine 15mm fits this bottom bolt, it's also going to be 42. For a full breakdown on that, just watch the axle video at that point, and you can get all the details if you want them. Alright, this one's at 40, so I'm going to go ahead and give it two 90-degree turns. This hub castle nut is 110. Hole lines right up, so I'm going to leave it right there. This time I'm going to go ahead and use my new cotter pins that came with my axles. Drop them in, bend them around. Now it's just time to put the brake caliper back on. Alright, the brake caliper is in place. Now as you can see from the blue on this bolt, they do put Loctite on these bolts. I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit back on here, and both of them, we'll put them in place. Alright, we'll go ahead and get these caliper bolts snugged up. The torque on these is 46 foot-pounds. And with that, we are done. The only thing left to do now is put the wheel back on and tighten these lugs down to 120 pounds, and then do the other side, which of course is exactly the same as this side. Once again, I'd like to thank SuperATV for making such great aftermarket products for our vehicles. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the trails.